Hi, and welcome back to the Asheville District Layout. In the previous video, we looked at our operating flood loader and how we load live coal loads into the trains on the layout. However, once a train returns to Asheville, it then has to go up a 2.6% grade to the power plant on the upper level. And that's what this video is about. So once the train arrives into Asheville, the first thing we need to do is add a little bit more power. With only 2 engines from the mine, that's not going to be enough to make it up the hill. So we're going to add 1 extra engine up front, and then we also need to add some helpers. So with an approach signal heading forward, the engines will pull forward of the switch and then reverse into the yard to add an extra engine. One thing of note that's kind of interesting in the operations here is the trains always have to depart Asheville on the outside main, or main track number 2. And the reason for that is that you can avoid having to cross over and using helpers to go up a crossover. Meanwhile, the helper crew gets the engines ready to hook onto the back of the train. For today's helpers, we're going to use 2 EMD SD70s. Now, typically, you'll see AC power or alternating current power on coal trains. However, that's not always the case in Asheville. We've noticed that over the years, they'll use just about anything they've got in the yard. While the helper engine crew brings the power out of the engine terminal, we see the head-end power reversing onto a yard track where they're going to pick up an extra engine that's sitting ready for them. For today's helper locomotive on the head end, we're using an EMD SD70 ACE. They're going to couple up to that, and then head out to the main line and couple onto the head end of the train. Meanwhile, the helper crew is going to run around the yard and head to the west end, where they'll enter the main line and then reverse onto the rear of the train to assemble the outbound train, which is ready to go up the hill. Now, one thing I want to mention real quick is that we don't use DPUs in the sense that we don't just consist all the engines together. Whenever we run these trains up the hill, we actually use 2 crews. We use someone running the head-end power and the helper power to get this train up the hill. And the reason for that is that the engines don't always run perfectly together. Different decoders, different engines, and a host of other reasons, including curvatures and gradients, make for DPU power where everything's consistent on one throttle to not always be for the best operation. Out at the control point on the west end of the yard, we catch the helper power, which has already received a signal onto the main line. They're going to pull past the control point and then reverse onto the rear of the coal train, which you can see there on the left-hand side of your screen. So with the helper locomotives now attached to the rear end train, the head end power assembled, and permission from the dispatcher to depart up the hill, the coal train is now ready to leave Asheville. Now, as I mentioned in the last video, running live coal loads actually requires some very careful training. You really don't want a derailment. And luckily, we haven't had any to date. But one of the unique, interesting operational challenges is that the head end and the helper crews have to communicate with each other throughout the trip up the hill. Throughout the trip, the head-end crew will continually call out speed steps on the throttle so that the helper crew can adjust. Meanwhile, the helper crew also has to look at the coupler slack on the back half of the train to make sure that they're not pulling too hard or pushing too hard. So typically, the helper locomotives push just a couple cars very lightly as you're departing the yard. However, once you've made it over the crossovers and the entire train is on the climb is when they can really kick in. And just about when the helper locomotives are leaving the yard is about the same time that the head end enters the loops. This is, without a doubt, the most difficult part of the climb to get the train over. About 99% of the climb here in the loops is curvature. On top of that, you're on a 2.6% grade, and a lot of the train is in a tunnel. So it's hard for the helper locomotives to see exactly how hard they're pushing. One neat thing about operations here is that we don't run helper locomotives just because it looks cool. We run them because we need them. For two reasons. One, if we just had 3 engines on the front and no engines on the rear, we would, without a doubt, stringline it. I've tried it before, and even though I haven't derailed anything, the cars have just about tipped over and I had to stop before the head end even made it to the signals there at the top of your screen. The second reason is that usually the train won't make it. It kind of depends on the engines, but 3 engines on the head end usually isn't enough power. Live coal loads are pretty heavy and do require helpers on the rear end. Now here in the loops, you can really see the entirety of the train as it climbs the hill. And one thing you'll notice is that it's pretty long. We usually run coal trains that are about 30 to 35 cars, which I know isn't exactly as long as a 100-car coal train, but it is a model, it is a layout, and we need to compress things a little bit. But it's still long, and with that does come a lot of chance for derailment. The longer the train, the heavier it is, the more chance you have to stringline, and et cetera, et cetera. However, it also makes it a lot more fun. It makes it a lot more exciting for crews, and the possibility of derailment, I think, just adds to the excitement and maybe even the realism of getting this train over the hill. Grovestone is a small city here at the top of the hill. It's a prototype location on the Asheville District, which isn't quite at the top of the hill, but it's pretty close. We like the name, and we wanted to add a siding. So here at Grovestone, the train will begin to slow down. Again, helper locomotives have to communicate with the head end to make sure that they're both slowing down at the same speed. So it's a very gradual process of slowing down. It's not a quick stop, just to make sure that we don't pull the train apart or derail anything as we bring the train to a stop. So for instance, the head end would call out speed step 10, speed step 8, speed step 7, etc., until we bring the train to a complete stop. Now, once the train is stopped, the helper locomotives are going to uncouple, and the crew is then going to take them back to Asheville. Just like the prototype, the helper locomotives are going to run back to Asheville under a different train symbol, usually either E28 or P87. With helper locomotives uncoupled from the train and permission to return back to Asheville, they now run light power under train symbol E28 back to the yard, where they can then couple up to another train and assist them up the hill. Meanwhile, the coal train departs westbound. With the steepest part of the hill behind them, the helpers are no longer needed and they can continue on to the power plant. There, we have a rotary dumper which unloads the cars into a hopper bin, but I'll save that for the next video. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.